Good morning, church. Man, God's good. God is so good all the time. God is good. If you're new here, welcome to Family Worship Center. I'm glad you're here. Like the announcement said, I'm super excited about next week. It's a baptism service. If you have not experienced a baptism service at Family Worship Center, do not miss our baptism service. We get out of the way. And we just wait and see what God does. There's times I think I'm going to jump off the stage into it just with somebody, like WWE style. We get so excited. My brother Josh is going to be giving his testimony that morning, and I'm going to tell you, if there's a man in your life, a man, a brother, a boyfriend, a male in your life that thinks that God's a joke, that his heart's hard towards God, that God's not listening to him when and doesn't hear him when he preaches or when he prays, you need to bring him next week. Yes. You need to bring them next week. We'll lay hands and we might get them in the baptism. Right. One more thing, this Sunday is the 5-year anniversary of us being in this building. 5 years here. It's just, boy, time flies when you're having fun. Time flies when you're having fun. I heard about this lady. She had got a call at work. Her daughter was sick, and the babysitter called her and said, hey, you really need to bring some medicine home. She's very ill, and you're going to have to come home. I can't take care of her. And so the lady went to the pharmacy, and she was a little panicked, and so she ran in really fast. You know how you do, and got the medicine, got the things she needed, walked back out and realized she had locked her keys in her car. I've been there. So her keys are in her car, and she calls the setter, and she goes, how's she doing? My keys are in my car. And the setter says, well, she's not doing real great. She could use the medicine, and I like to go home before I catch it. And so she's got more panicked, and the babysitter said, hey, why don't you see if you can find a coat hanger? I've heard people can use coat hangers. They can get in cars. And so she kind of looked around, walked around, was asking God. She said, God, I really need you to send me an answer here. I need to get home to my daughter. And so as she walked around, she found kind of a rusty, bent-up coat hanger that was in the gutter of the parking lot. And she thought, well, maybe somebody else had used this to get in their car. So she picked it up, and she walked over to her car, and she tried in vain. She was messing around. She realized pretty quickly there was no chance that she was going to figure that out. Well, about that time, an old beat-up pickup truck pulls up. Big old greasy bearded guy gets out. He's got a do-rag on. He's got tattoos down to his fingertips. He sees what she's doing, and he just walks over, and he says, what are you doing? She says, well, I've locked my keys in my car. My daughter's sick at home. My babysitter wants to go home. I'm having a real good day, and I'm trying to use this coat hanger to get in the car. And he says, well, do you mind if I try? And she was thinking to herself, she said, God, this is who you send me? This is who you send me, God? This guy, of course he can get in his pickup truck. It's got a gap in the door. He just reach in and unlock it. He grabbed the coat hanger. He bent it into a shape. He reached down in the door, pulled up, and the car come unlocked immediately. She give him the biggest hug. She said, oh, you are a wonderful man. He said, lady, I am not a wonderful man. He said, I've been out of prison about 6 hours. I am a car thief. And she said, like I said, God, thank you for sending me a professional. Sometimes God sends unexpected answers to our prayers. Just because it doesn't look like what you think it should look like doesn't mean that it's not what God has sent you. Over the years, he sent me a lot of things that were unexpected answers to my prayers. See, that's proof of God's sovereignty. He knows what you need before you need it. He doesn't need our help. Stop thinking you have an issue that he doesn't have an answer for. Stop thinking you have an issue that he doesn't have an answer for. He is sovereign. He was not elected. He was not appointed. He is God all by himself. He is the Alpha, the Omega. He will be here long before you were. He'll be here long after you are gone. No one asked him. No one elected him. He is God all by himself. When I asked who he was, he said, I am. When I said, who am I? He said, you are more than a conqueror. You're a mighty royal priesthood. You are blessed and highly favored. All praise be to God. He and no other God deserves it. Only He is the living God. Only He can deliver you. Only He can save you. Only He can drop the chains of addiction. Only He can restore marriages. Only He can fix what is in your life. Only He. He is God all by Himself. All by Himself. And He wants to cure what's ailing you, but you've got to walk. You've got to walk. You've got to stop thinking you have the answer. God has the answer. You've got to submit to Him. He's God all by Himself. At the end of the day, though, we are people. People are people. People in the Bible were no different than people today. I'm going to take you to a few verses I've been meditating on this week. We're in the Old Testament this week. The title of this message is What's in Your Hand, and it simply means God will use what is close to you. And before I can give these verses to you, I would be remiss if I did not spend a minute and tell you about the kind of man God uses. I want to tell you about Elijah and his successor, Elisha. Elijah was a great prophet. He describes himself as zealous for God. Now listen, I wish they had different names. I do. We call one of them Larry. I don't know. Because it's like Elijah, Elisha. I mean, it's so close. It's so close. Well, anyway, so we got Elijah. He was the original, the OG, Elijah. And so we catch up with him in 1 Kings 19. Now listen, this guy had just put 450 of the false prophet Baal's gods to death. 450 of the false prophets to death. One guy. But yet we find him hiding in a cave. Why do we find him hiding in a cave? Because when he killed those 450 prophets, he angered a queen. I think her name was Jezebel. Yep, Jezebel. He angered a queen. So she set out to kill him. So we find him hiding in a cave. Now I want to point out one thing here, guys. He killed 450 men, no problem. One lady's got him hiding in a cave. One woman's got him hiding in a cave. Hell has no fury like a woman scorned. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean. If you've been married very long, you know what I mean. You know what I mean. Men get over it. Women remember. Women remember. I'm going to need a ride home after church. But we find him hiding in 1 Kings 19, 11 through 13. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. See, what God was saying was, hey, get in my path. I'm getting ready to pass by. You need to get in my path. And this is a whole other sermon. I could take it a lot of ways, but I got to thinking about how many people, and Brad has preached on not letting God pass by. How many people were healed because they got in God's path? How many blind people's sight was restored because they got in God's path? How many lepers were clean because they got in God's path? The woman with the issue of blood, 3 streets over, she bleeds to death, but she got in God's path. So God tells him, come out of the cave, get to the edge of the rock, I'm about to pass by. Because he was asking for an answer to a problem. This queen was going to kill him. The Bible tells us a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a great fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and he stood at the mouth of the cave. And a voice said to him, what are you doing here, Elisha? What are you doing here, Elisha? You never do God with a high voice. That's my God voice. What are you doing here, Elisha? I just picture him as real big. Couple things here. Earthquakes, fire. See, when God's about to speak, the earth notices. The winds and the waves still know his name. The trees will bow down to him. They know who he is. People may deny him. People can say that they forgot about him. People can say that he's not real at all. But the truth of it is, when he shows up on the scene, rocks start breaking, wind starts moving, air catches fire, the earth notices. The earth notices. And so Elisha was listening for him. A whisper, in all that commotion, all that going on around him. It would have been easy to lose God's voice, but Elijah was diligent Elijah was listening for God, and he heard that whisper. So that's my first point today. God uses a man or a woman that will listen for that whisper, that will listen for him. So 1 Kings 19 through 21, a little farther in the story. So Elisha went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. All right, so during this conversation with God, God tells him a bunch of stuff. You can read about it. It'll give you something to do this week in your Bible. It'd be really great. But part of what he tells Elijah to do is he says, hey, you're kind of getting old. You need to anoint your successor, a prophet of it. Now, this is before Jesus. See, Jesus was the last prophet. Jesus was the final prophet, but this is before Jesus. This is before we had the Holy Spirit and we had a direct line of communication. They had to go through a holy person to hear from God. So he says, hey, find this guy Elisha, anoint him the next prophet of Israel. And so Elijah finds him. We catch up with him here in 1 Kings 19 in a field. He found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him, threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. Let me kiss my father and my mother goodbye, he said, and then I will come with you. Go back, Elijah replied. What have I done to you? In essence, he was saying, yeah, go back and you can tell him goodbye. So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and he slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and become his servant. Now, I have read that verse multiple times, and it had always kind of skipped my mind that he had burnt the plow. And so I got thinking about that because God took me there this week, and I said, what are we looking at here? And he said, God uses a man that won't go back. God uses a man that won't go back. See, Elisha was a farmer. Farming was comfortable and familiar to Elisha. Elijah was calling him to service for God, something bigger that God wanted him to do. So Elisha, by slaughtering his oxen, he could have put them in a barn. He could have parked the plows, and he could have said, okay, Elijah, I'll go with you, and if things get hard or things get bad or things get weird, then I'll just go back and start my farm back up. But God uses the man that burns the plow. In essence, when he broke the plow up, when he slaughtered the oxen, he was saying to God, I will not go back. I have eliminated any possibility of going back to my old life because you are calling me to something better. Because you are calling me to something higher. I will not go back. Some of y'all in here need to slaughter your ox and burn your plow. Some of you need to burn your plow. God, I know where I was comfortable. I know where I was comfortable, God. But if you're calling me to something better, I'm going to destroy whatever it is that keeps me from you, and I'm going to walk. I'm going to walk. Slaughter the drugs. Slaughter the adultery in your life. Slaughter the misdeeds and the shady deals. Burn the jealousy. Burn the anger. Follow God. Burn it. God uses a man that won't go back. He uses a man that won't go back. So later, we find Elisha. 2 Kings 4, 1 through 7. This is much later in the Old Testament. We find him standing in a lady's house. Oh, the wife of a man from the company of the prophets cried out to Elisha, your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord. But now his creditor is coming to take my 2 boys as his slaves. Elisha replied to her, how can I help you? Tell me what you have in your house. Your servant has nothing here at all, except a small jar of olive oil. Elisha said, go around, ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few. Then go inside, shut the door behind you and your sons, pour oil into all the jars, and as each is filled, put them to one side. She left him, shut the door behind her sons. They brought the jars to her, and she kept pouring. When all the jars were full, she said, bring me another one. And they replied, there are no jars left. And the oil stopped flowing. She went to the man of God, and she said, okay, what do I do now? And he said, go and sell the oil, pay your debts. You and your sons can live on what's left. What did God use? He used what she had in her house. See, in those days, your debt didn't die with you. They just came and got your kids to pay it off. They just came to get your kids. And see, I could do a whole sermon on that right there. You are passing your debts on to your family. It might not be financial. I'm talking spiritual debts. Break the generational cycle. We talk about generational curses. I want to talk about generational blessings. I've told you about this. I'm blessed because of the prayers of the people that came before me. If you aren't praying for your children, if you aren't praying for your grandchildren, if you aren't praying for your lineage, now is a good time to start. Now is a good time to start. Yesterday wouldn't even be soon enough. Start praying for your lineage, church, another time. So back to this lady. He says, what do you have in this house? And she says, well, we don't have anything. We don't have anything. Well, we got this jar of oil. Daddy's dead. They're coming to get my kids. This is looking really bad, Elijah. This is looking terrible. I think I'll just sit Indian style on the floor and just wait to die. That's how I picture people when they're like giving themselves a pity party. They just kind of get down Indian style. And back when I could cross my legs, I used to sit Indian style. I'll just wait here to die. But see, she knew enough to ask the man of God for help. She knew enough to ask for help. So he says, borrow a bunch of jars, fill them from your small jar. Now, listen, this lady was asking for help. How cool would it have been if God would have just like rained down money out of the sky? He could have, okay? Or how cool would it have been? It would have still been a great story if God would have filled a few jars enough to get her sons out of debt, because really that's all she was asking for was, hey, I want to keep them from taking my children. But we don't serve a God that's good enough. We serve a God that exceeds your need. He didn't just stop at filling jars to get the kids out of Hawk. He stopped when the jars were so full and she could not only get her kids out of bondage, but she could live comfortably. Now go and live on the rest, he said. We serve a God that exceeds what you even ask him to do. There's all kinds of examples in the Bible of that. Get me another pot. Get me another pot. Can you imagine her excitement? And then they were like, hey, we're out of pots. Like we borrowed everybody's pots in the whole neighborhood. Now, the Bible says that God wants to bless us abundantly. He wants to bless you abundantly. But how did he do it? He used what was in her house. God will oftentimes use what is near us to bless us, what we already possess. I was talking to Brandon. I call him Pastor Brandon. He's not official yet, but he is to me. Pastor Brandon, and this is why I love his heart. We were talking about this week at lunch, and I said, Brandon, you know, he can use anything. And he said, you know what? He said, that woman could have said, all I got in my house is shoe polish, and God would have found a way to take the shoe polish and multiply it and get her kids out of Hawk. God can use anything. He can use anything. And that's where you got to get your heart. You want to see restoration in your life? You want to see healings? You got to eliminate any doubt that God's going to do it. We've got to start eliminating doubts that God's going to do it. Why did the apostles heal people, raise people from the dead, restore sight to the blind? Why were the apostles able to do that? Because they saw Jesus do it. They saw Jesus do it. They had perfect faith. There was no doubt in their mind that God will do this if I ask for it, because Jesus told us he would. We've got to eliminate the doubts. God, I want you to fix this, God. Well, if you can, listen, God can. God can. Don't go meekly to the throne. Head in and say, my God is mighty, he's all powerful. You promised to prosper me. Fix this for your glory. That's the other thing, for your glory. See, we live to glorify him. He doesn't live to glorify us. We live to glorify him. The key is the faith. See, she has this little jar and a little bit of oil inside. And the man of God told her, borrow what you can, start filling jars. Now, she had a couple options. She could have said, I've got this little jar of oil. There's no possible way I'm going to fill these bigger jars. Why are you telling me to do this? She could have argued with him. She could have said, hey, didn't you hear the debtors were coming? I told you we've got to do something. We need to hide these kids. She could have said a lot of things. But her faith said, fill the jars. So she got to fill in jars. So that's the first piece. How does he use what's close to you? You've got to have faith that God is going to do what he says he's going to do. It requires action is the second part. See, God will meet you way more than halfway. He met her way more than halfway. But it took action on her part. God didn't just release her children, he multiplied that oil. Olive oil was used for medicine, food, perfume, you name it back then. It's very, very valuable. But she had to have faith. Now, here's the second thing. He didn't just sell the oil for her either. She had to actually think about how heavy jars of oil would have been. She probably had like a horse and a cart. She would have had to load with her sons all these jars up. It was work. It was work. She actually had to not only fill the jars, then she had to actually put the work in to go to town and sell them. We've got to put feet on our prayers today. We've got to put feet on our prayers today. God doesn't just spoon feed you. He will bless you. He'll meet you more than halfway, but you've got to walk. You've got to go to the market and sell some oil. You've got to load it up. You've got to put the work in. See, God didn't kill Goliath. He gave David the sling and the stones, and then David took the shot. God used what David was familiar with, what was close to him. God didn't give Moses a powerful ability to speak. He sent Aaron with him to speak for him because Aaron was close to him. Speaking of Moses, you remember all the excuses he gave God? Oh, God, I can't do this. I'm a bad speaker. My face is broke out, God. I don't know if I can really go talk to the people. How will they know I sent you, God? And he said, what's in your hand? Well, a stick. I got this staff. It's a stick. Drop it. Turns into a snake. Pick it back up. They will know I sent you because I am. What's in your hand? And sometimes we're asking for prayers, and I find this in my own life, and I'm asking for God to do things, and the whole time he's going, what's in your hand? What's in your hand? What can you pick up and walk with? Sometimes you've got to put legs on your prayers. Let's talk about your life today. God, free my children from addiction. It requires action. God, save my marriage. It requires action. God, help me to lose weight and get in shape. You know what God did when I prayed that? He sent me a gym membership. He did. Now, could God have made me Arnold Schwarzenegger overnight by flipping his face? Sure, he would have, but why would he? Why would he? Why, he's not a genie. What's the purpose? It required work. He said, okay, you want to get in shape? Here's a gym membership. It requires work. Now my prayer has shifted from God, I'd like to get in shape, to God, would you multiply my efforts? You see that shift? When you start walking towards God, God, I need you to multiply my efforts. I want you to come with me, God. That's the shift you've got to make. I used to ask him for a miracle. I wanted him to give it to me, but I had to move. I had to move. See, some of you wake up next to your spouse and you're both miserable and you're wondering why God hasn't moved in this relationship, because it requires action. Take your wife out on a date and remind her how you used to make her laugh. Ladies, treat your husband like you did when he was your boyfriend. Meet her. Men, treat her like you did when you were dating. It requires action. Well, we haven't been on a date in years, Matt. We just sit around and stare at each other and we're hoping God will just put desire back in our hearts. God will bless any amount of effort you put into this thing, but it requires walking. Remember how you used to feel about him. Remember the love that brought you to the altar in the first place to be married. Take her on a date. I can't give you guys that enough. Take her on a date. You know, load the kids up if you got to. I don't know. Because we make too many excuses in this world and it gets boring, right? Well, got the kids, I'll just cook this. Well, I'll just do the ramen noodles tonight, you know. Hey, I made gourmet ramen noodles, babe. You've got to get out of the house once in a while. You need to stay interested in each other because someone else will become interested in one of both of you if not. You have to prop each other up. The devil wants you miserable. The devil wants you stagnant. The devil wants you hooked on something too numb to feel. The devil wants your children broken so that they can never accomplish what God has planned. Burn the plow. Burn the plow. Tell Satan, I'm not going back. You can't have my wife, devil. God put this together. You can't have me hooked on this or that, devil. I'm burning it today. I won't go back. You can't have my children, devil. God's got a plan for them. I refuse to give them to you. Burn the plow. My marriage will not be destroyed. I'm burning the plow. Say it with me. We're going to burn the plow. We're going to burn the plow. I refuse to give it to you, Satan. I'm burning it. I'm not going back. I refuse to be in bondage for the rest of my life. I refuse for my lineage to be broken because of decisions I'm making. I refuse for my kids to see me grow up in prison. I refuse to give you my wife, God, or devil, because God, give her to me. I'm not going to give you my children. They're God's. I'm not going to give you my brother. I'm going to pray till he gets here in church and gives a testimony and changes somebody else's life. You can't have him. You can't have him. And I'm going to pray until he burns all his plows where he's got nothing to go back to but look at you. I'm going to pray until each and every one of the people in my life, the people I touch, burn their plows and walk with me towards you. I want to eliminate the doubt, God. I want to eliminate the fear. I want to eliminate the temptation to go back to the old way of things, because the old way of things are a world that is broken, bruised, and battered. I will burn the plow. I'm not going back. You can't have it, Satan. Not today. You can't have it. And when you burn the plow, when you show God you're serious, he will bless that tremendously. Get into marriage counseling. Get into church. Get help for that addiction. Burn the plow. Watch God work. Elisha got a double portion of Elijah's anointing. Why? Because he burnt the plow. He was doubly blessed as Elijah was, the OG. He was greater than he was, did greater things, because he was willing to burn the plow. And I want you to think about this too as I close. What was Jesus willing to give for your life? What was Jesus willing to give for your life? His life. I heard about this pastor. He walked up to the stage Sunday morning. I just kind of envisioned it as the video's going, and I come down the aisle dragging a giant bird cage, rusty bird cage. Pulled her up the steps, sets her down on the podium, or next to the podium, and everybody's looking at that bird cage. And he says, yesterday, I was walking down an alley, and there was a young boy with this bird cage. And he had 4 birds in it, field birds. And he had a stick. And he was poking them, tormenting them, having a good time with them. And so I stopped and I said, young man, what's with the birds? He said, oh, I'm having fun with these birds. He said, look, I can get them to fight with each other. If I poke one, they'll fight with the other ones. I've been pulling out their feathers because that makes them even meaner and even fight more. I'm having a good time with them. And he said, well, what are you going to do with them once they get tired of that? He said, oh, I've got cats. I'll let them go, and the cats will have them. And then that'll be fun to watch too. And the pastor said, young man, what would you take for those birds? And he said, oh, you don't want those birds. They're just field birds. They can't even sing. They're ugly. They're not even pretty. You don't want them, mister. You should go find your own birds. He says, no. What do you want for those birds? Would you take $10 for the birds? He said, mister, for $10, I'll give you the cage. So the pastor told us he picked the cage up and he took it to a grassy spot and he opened the door and he coaxed the birds out gently. Off to freedom they were. Well, that explained the empty bird cage. Then the pastor said, let me tell you a story. Satan was looking at the earth. He had his stick out and he was poking people. And he was watching as they fought with each other. He was watching as he talked them into segregating each other into race, sexuality, what their past was. And Jesus came along. And he said, what are you doing with those people? He said, oh, I'm having a good time. Look, if I poke them a little bit, I can get them to fight with each other. I've separated the black ones from the white ones and the brown ones because I think I can get them to fight with each other too in groups. I've taught these people how to build guns and bombs and kill each other and maim each other and steal from each other. It's a lot of fun. I'm having a good time watching this. And Jesus said, what would you take for those people? What would you take for those people? And he said, oh, you don't want these people. Look at them. They're not even pretty. You know, if I give you these people, they would like drag you through the streets, spit on you, and crucify you. They'd kill you anyway. You don't want these people. And Jesus repeated the question. what do you want for those people? He said, I want all your tears and all your blood, and I want your life. Then I'll give them to you. And Jesus paid the price. He paid the price so that you and I don't have to sit across from people and be segregated by black or white. So that you or I don't have to judge people first and ask questions second. So that you or I can love each other first. He gave us freedom. He opened the cage door. He opened the cage door. And some of you guys, some of us, and I've been there. Man, I've been there. 15 years ago, there I was. High school, there I was. I literally suck into myself when I meet somebody that I haven't seen since high school. It's not that I was a terrible person, but I was nowhere near the kid of God I should have been. Cruel. Some of us are still inside the cage and the door's open. And we're still busy fighting with each other. We're still busy poking each other and segregating each other. We're still busy breaking each other's spirits, watching our marriages fall apart, watching our children die of addiction and overdose. Some of us are still in that cage, and Jesus is standing outside of it with the door open going, but I paid for this. You don't have to be in there anymore. Why do we still walk around in the cage? I'm going to tell you something. It's been really hard to preach today because God has told me there's a brokenness in here. I almost opened with it. There's a brokenness in here. And I'm not talking regular brokenness. I'm talking like brokenness. Somebody in here might be thinking about taking their own life today. I don't know. I refuse to let you leave and let Satan have it. That's all I've thought about this whole time. That's all I could focus on. I can feel the brokenness. Listen, the altars are open. And we're going to sing, and there are going to be people come up. But if your life depends on it today, if your marriage depends on it today, if your health depends on it today, you need to get out of your chair. You need to quit looking around. You need to walk. Because God has sent me to tell you the cage door's open. You don't have to stay in that. You don't have to stay in that brokenness. You don't have to stay in that hurt. You don't have to be in that depression. We can help. We can arrange a meeting with God, and there's more than that. We will get you resources to help you. My heart's just broke this morning.